Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Hannah Storch, and my presentation today is titled OCR Quality Factors, Clarity, Context, and Content. So as Peter mentioned, I'm a project manager for Pixel Acuity Digital Transitions, and today I will be talking about Optical Character Recognition, or OCR, which is essentially the use of technology to distinguish text from digital images of physical objects or documents. So this text recognition involves examining the text of a document and translating it into a code that can be easily used for data collection, management, and research. So digitizing and recognizing these types of texts makes the information more easily presented, edited, stored, and searched. So with this presentation, I plan to show you just how far we've come with this technology and what factors you should consider when implementing OCR in order to make the most of your digital assets. So before we begin, I'd just like to briefly introduce you to Pixel Acuity as the Service Bureau Division of Digital Transitions. So with over half a century of combined expertise in digitalization and collection imaging within the cultural heritage community, Pixel Acuity merged with Digital Transitions in 2019. Digital Transitions was originally founded to bring industry-leading photographic solutions to photographers. And with the addition of DT Heritage, they quickly became the leading designer and manufacturer of digitization solutions for the cultural heritage community. As one company, all three aspects provide unparalleled digitization solutions and services. And we have spent years perfecting the art of mass digitization. And now we kind of want to turn our attention to what happens after we hand over those digital files and how we can facilitate the post-production and post-digitization processes. As an application, optical character recognition has come a long way. And since we're all lovers of history here, I'd just like to take a moment to sort of take us back. So manual or handwritten transcription has basically been around as long as the written word. The only real problem with it is that it's very time-consuming and labor-intensive. In order to ease some of this burden, the first instances of mechanized OCR was actually in the early 1920s when Emanuel Goldberg used a photoelectric cell to conduct pattern recognition and retrieve accounting data from microfilmed business and bank documents. Although it started out as a specialized commodity that had to be trained with images of each character and was also limited to recognizing one font at a time, by the 1970s, OCR was commercialized, and by the early 2000s, it became available online as a cloud-based service. So as we entered the digital age, not only was OCR more readily available, but the need for documents to become available and accessible online increased exponentially. With the digital age, the amount of information and resources for contextualization and comparison of OCR expanded rapidly. And with the introduction of AI, traditional OCR methods were greatly improved. So AI essentially allows OCR systems to take all available resources into account. So finding links, correlations, and identifying data structures to create an organic knowledge pool that's able to adapt over time. So using a range of these technologies, including machine learning, natural language processing, and image processing, OCR software is now able to learn new languages and adjust to changes in text and document types much more easily than ever before. Within the past few years, we in the cultural heritage community have all struggled to find ways to limit time spent in person on more laborious tasks and focus our energies and activities on work and the quality and accuracy of our programs. OCR is a time-saving measure that not only increases efficiency, but in also many cases, accuracy. In order to achieve the most accurate OCR for a document, there's a certain amount of pre-processing that can help. This can include deskewing to content. So in the instance that a document was not properly aligned when scanned, or that the text itself was not straight on the page, which frequently happens with older texts, the image could actually be tilted and deskewed to the content to create lines that are horizontal and therefore more legible. Could also use binarization, which essentially converts an image to black and white. and it can be used to more easily distinguish text from the background, as the stark contrast provides further support for the OCR mechanism. You could also use layout analysis or zoning during this pre-flight period to identify different blocks of texts like captions or columns or paragraphs within a document. So this can be useful for things like newspaper articles. When actually applying OCR, there are two potential main methods: matrix maxing, say that 10 times fast, matrix matching, and feature detection. So matrix matching is actually the simpler of the two. It takes an image and compares it to an existing library of character matrices or templates to generate a match. Meanwhile, feature detection is a little more complex. It looks for general features like diagonal lines, curvatures, intersections, and such, and compares them to other features on the image within a certain distance. The particular software that we use, which is DT PixelFlow, first performs a layout analysis on the image to segment the location of the text. After it's found the general location, the OCR module then performs text recognition analysis on the specified location in order to generate the transcription. Then it moves on to the final post-processing step, in which errors are corrected by feeding the translation through a language model or dictionary. So these lexicons can actually be further refined based on the collection topic or using existing metadata information, which also further increases the accuracy of the software. So for example, if you were going to be digitizing logbooks from a natural history collection relating to the Galapagos Island, you could further increase the accuracy of the software by using a lexicon that focused on biological features and scientific names that can be found in the Galapagos Islands. You can also add the addition of error correction like near neighbor analysis, which uses frequencies of co-occurrence to correct mistakes by noting words that are usually seen together. So to use an example from close to home, the words Washington and DC are much more likely to occur in a text than Washington, DCA, which doesn't really exist. So the main question that we're all asking ourselves is, how good will the OCR for this document be? And to answer that, we really have three key factors: the clarity of the writing, what you want to use the OCR document for, or in this case, the context, and then the language that it's written in, which is the content. So while rather self-explanatory, clarity of the text refers to how clear the style, font, spread, and ink spacing of the text on the pages. So essentially, how legible is it? So for example, faded handwritten cursive on a deteriorating page is going to be much harder for the OCR software to read and transcribe than, say, modern typed text on a pristine pamphlet. The samples indicated here are actually from a recent book digitization project featuring early modern volumes from the United States, England, and France. So the printing process during this hand press period, which is roughly from 1475 to 1800, while it was systematized in certain ways, it also produces text with fluctuating baselines, mixed fonts, and varied concentration of inks, as you can see in the 3 pages in this particular slide. And all of these have to be recognized and sifted through by the same OCR software. So it's important to sort of keep in mind that if the clarity of the text is difficult for you to read, it's also probably going to be difficult for the OCR software as well. The contents quality factor asks the question, what are you hoping or expecting to achieve with the OCR? So the value or usefulness of the OCR also depends on what you're trying to do with it. Essentially, what is more important for you and your institution? Word for word accuracy, meaning searching and finding specific words within the document and data set, or the context and meaning of the text within the whole page. So in this example pictured here, we recently digitized a collection of community periodicals relating to Jewish history. There wasn't a lot of initial metadata for this collection, but because of the creation of searchable PDFs, researchers could actually find pertinent information that they needed. So for example, what I've done here is I've searched for the word Hebrew within one periodical. And within that one 27-page PDF, the search software, which is just Adobe, found 12 instances throughout the 27 pages. So it was effective at finding the relevant information in a manner that was far more efficient than me manually going through and trying to identify the word Hebrew in 27 pages. In this case, the per letter accuracy was more important to this client than the absolute accuracy of the OCR. The content quality factor asks the question, does the language of the text document fall into excellent support, some support, or no support? What I mean by this is that the algorithms and tools for OCR have a bias. So more time goes into the development of tools and support for the usual suspects in terms of language. So there's more time spent on languages like English, Spanish, French, and Chinese. And some tools have a wider range of languages supported than others and use classification terms like standard or normal support, experimental support, meaning that the language is supported, but they're acknowledging that there's still some work to do, or no support at all. So for example, in this recent book project, which featured several thousand rare and fragile manuscripts in both English, French, and Latin, the category of language was excellent support, as all of those are sort of widely written and recognized languages. However, if we had something in ancient Sumerian, it might require a little more TLC and a little more R&D to really get the same level of accuracy. Now, based on what I've just shown you, I've run a couple of examples of the 5 basic categories of text that you might come across. Artificial type, which is essentially a modern printed process on modern material, is the first type. The second would be an artificial type from a less modern source. So for example, a typewriter, a carbon copy, or a fax. The third is handwritten, neatly and clearly printed text. While there's also a fourth category, which is handwritten, neatly printed cursive. And then finally, we have the, shall we say, embellished cursive, which is a little bit less neatly printed. The samples that I've created are as they appear, meaning that there's been no additional pre-processing, deskewing, binarization, or zoning to help the OCR software along. So when we look at these examples, I'd like to think of them in the context of the 3 C's: clarity, context, and content. This first sample that you see on the screen now is of artificial type. So it's on modern material with a modern printer. The letters are very clear and distinct, well-spaced and legible. As you can see with your eye, we've got the initial page on the left and then the OCR TXT file on the right. This particular client requested searchable PDFs and highly valued the word-for-word accuracy. And as you can see, the average accuracy for this material was very high. It was 99.9%. And the word-for-word accuracy was even higher, meaning that not only did they get a transcript of the document, but could also search for distinct words very easily within that document. The content of the text was also written in English, so a language with excellent support. Essentially, this is a prime example of what can be achieved with modern, clearly typed document and an OCR software. With this example of artificial type on onion skin, we actually used white paper to back the material during the production phase. This isn't uncommon as it increases legibility for the human eye when you're digitizing documents and also increases legibility for the OCR software. Even with the difference in material type, so it's a more translucent paper, you still have a very legible and clear text on the page. And the accuracy of the software is very high, and you've got even higher word-for-word readability. So you've got a 99.1% overall accuracy. And of course, it does help that we are dealing with English once again. And here we have an example of a handwritten, although very neatly, text. And while the letters are close together, it is still print, not cursive. And we have a very high rate of accuracy, so 94.2%. And this particular client wanted both a transcription record, so a TXT file, and a searchable PDF. So they had the extracted transcript, as well as the contextualized ability to search the page word for particular things that they were looking for. So for example, if they were looking to find things relating to Mrs. Phillips, they could do a Control F search and find this document. And once again, we are seeing an English text, so highly supported. And here we have an example of what I'd still consider clear and neat cursive. So as we can see with our own eyes, this text is getting a little bit more indeterminate, but you can still make out certain keywords. So in this case, the word for word accuracy is very good. So you could search for certain terms within the document. You also still have a 91.6 overall accuracy. And once again, the language is English, so highly supported. Finally, we have our last example, the embellished handwritten cursive in the form of these logbooks. So unfortunately, as you can see with your eyes, the text is getting a little less clear, and you also are dealing with paper that shows a few more signs of wear and tear that can also impact legibility. And because the accuracy overall is lower than the other samples, it's a little harder to see this document in TXT form, as you see on the right. However, this particular client highly valued word for word searching, so keyword searching. So they were actually receiving searchable PDFs. So there was still a lot of value for them to be able to search for something like 1856 and find the names of the parties involved in this particular record. The written word is notoriously susceptible to degradation over time. So once a document is entered into digital format, it creates a preservation record and a digital surrogate should anything happen to the original material. OCRing that document, it creates the ability to transcribe and create searchable documents, which adds a layer of accessibility and usability to this digital format. So not only are you getting an image, but you're getting a workable document. When you're conducting OCR, your choice of file format often depends on the needs of your institution. So a searchable PDF provides context as the text is overlaid over the page, whereas a plain TXT file, like we saw in those last examples, is essentially a transcription of the document, but it doesn't have that same contextualization. There's also the option of many other formats, including an Alto XML file, which is kind of a combination of the two in that it's an extracted transcription record that also provides information of where the text came from on the page, although you don't see it over the actual digital file. When you're determining file format, it's also important to take into consideration your data management or content management software system and what makes sense long-term for your institution. Not only does it provide readable, searchable documents for internal purposes, researchers, and the general public alike, but OCR also can add to descriptive metadata in the digital record for objects. So in a recent project, we were actually able to extract folder level metadata for items by imaging the folders themselves and then OCRing the descriptive information that was handwritten on the label tab. Needless to say, I was very excited about this. We were actually able to glean the subject of the folder contents, the pertinent date range relating to the contents of the folder, and the folder's location within the context of the museum collection as a whole. And then we were able to extract this information and incorporate it into a metadata spreadsheet, which we prepared to the client specifications so that it was easily ingestible into the DAMs. Internally, OCR can help index uncategorized documents more quickly and economically, and allows for pertinent information to become more searchable and accessible. Externally, OCR is a valuable research tool as people are able to read entire documents and books, as well as search for specific types of information. But ultimately, as a software, OCR champions accessibility and availability, and it's come a very long way in recent years. While it's not an exact fix for everything, it is something that we're looking forward to doing more research into. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Hannah, thank you for all this on OCR. Right away, we have a question. This is from Andre Popovich. Andre Popovich. How is OCR accuracy measured for each individual job?
So it depends on what you're looking for. There is the average accuracy, which is basically the word for word accuracy, and the overall contextual accuracy, which is what you saw in those samples. But you can also get sort of distinct measurements of that accuracy. So if you were focusing on getting searchable PDFs, that word for word accuracy would be what you were looking for. It's just very dependent on your needs and your institution's needs.
And I have a question for you. From your perspective, in order to get more, I guess, clarity out of the three C's, what is the benefits of a raw workflow?
Well, there's a lot. With a raw workflow, you're able to capture a lot more information. We use raw workflows and then create derivatives. So you'll frequently use a TIFF or JPEG to actually conduct the OCR from. But if you start with a raw file, the quality of that TIFF or JPEG is going to be very high.
Okay. We have another one from Andre Popovich. So it's based on samples. What percentage is usually hand checked to ascertain accuracy?
So there are certain levels of correction involved in OCR. What you saw there and what a lot of institutions actually go for is uncorrected OCR. So you kind of just take it as it is. And you can always make sort of back end adjustments to an OCR document. My first job in archives was actually hand checking OCR about 10 years ago. And it was very different from checking now. It's become a lot more accurate, but a lot of institutions will still do that human check and correction. It just still takes a lot more time.
We have a question from Bill Cunningham. How well does your OCR software work with pre-19th century printed documents?
Our software, the DT PixelFlow software, is very good at pre-19th century printed documents. As we've been dealing with that early modern book collection. So if I actually go back to these, the accuracy on these documents was still about 98%, if I recall correctly. And that's using 3 completely different early texts. And I believe these books were 18th and 19th century. And we also have an example of, I believe, this particular book written in French, but with sort of the long S's that you've mentioned, also had a very high accuracy. I want to say 98 or 99 overall.
We have a question from Hyro. What is the where was this software developed? And have you run any, I'm sorry, is a two-part question here. Where was this software developed, and have you run into any problems with the software, such as a crash?
So our particular software was developed in-house. It's proprietary. It's the DT PixelFlow software. There are other ones, such as Abby is one that I've seen used, or Cortex, but our particular software is in-house. And we have not really run into many issues. The OCR that we use is cloud-based, so there are occasionally interruptions based on sort of internet connectivity that you'd find with any such cloud-based software, but no major issues. And using a cloud-based software is actually still probably preferable to others, as you're getting increased relevant information from other sources.
On all that note, if you had to pick a generic PPI, does it really matter for older text versus newer text?
Not really, I'd say. Most text is pretty legible at 300 or 400. Any higher than that, and it wouldn't be as relevant. Sometimes we'll capture at 500 or 600 and then downscale, but I'd say, and I wouldn't go any lower than 300 because you'll start to lose pertinent information.
From your experience, what's more important, sharpness or contrast?
Both. Sharpness is very important. And sharpness is something that you kind of need before the image goes through the process. We can add that binarization component sort of in the middle to increase contrast if it's not already there. But as far as like initial capture goes, I would say sharpness.
Gotcha. We have a question from Steve Crusett from New York Public Library. Perhaps this was covered before he joined in, but how well does the OCR function when a capture describes a page from a book where the text curves deep into the gutter?
We did not cover that. And I would say it depends on how deep that gutter is. We've had very good experience with printed text, even if it's in the gutter, but I think it just depends on the legibility. And I'd say in this case, the focus. If the text is still sharp, your OCR software is still pretty much able to handle it. And if you're not experiencing too much distortion because of that curve.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have a question from Robert Dupuy Devlin. Is the DT PixelFlow available to license to? Is DT PixelFlow available to license to users of DT equipment systems?
Pete, would you like to handle that?
You're gonna pass that one on me, huh? Okay. Fair enough. To date, no. We will definitely consider it down the future, but right now that is a product as a service, software as a service from the Pixel Acuity division. So next question is from Hyro again. How fast can the software process all this data you're processing?
Incredibly fast. So I just ran some files today. It was about 2,000 from this early modern printed text. So anything between 1700 and 1800. And it processed about 2,000 files in 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's full processing. So that's an integrated pipeline that does the image processing, derivative processing, and OCR. The OCR, if you were to just extract that portion, would probably be even faster.
So we have another question from Daniel Ufert. Does the OCR have a built-in binarization step, ignoring all pixels over a certain brightness or threshold, or does a human need to manually choose a threshold for that to make it beneficial?
We can add a built-in step. At the moment, it's fairly customizable based on the needs of collections. So if we know we're going to be dealing with something where there isn't a lot of contrast or faded text, we'll add additional support steps.
Mm-hmm. This is from Jen Morris, and I believe Jen is from MIT. What steps are done in post-processing that is automated?
I have a follow-up question, Jen. Post-processing of the files or post-processing specifically for OCR?
We have to wait a second on that.
Yeah. So as for OCR, the sort of post-processing step would be the comparison against that lexicon or dictionary. And again, we can tailor that to the needs of the collection, making the OCR even more accurate. Yes. So for our particular software, we have an integrated pipeline. So DT PixelFlow handles the OCR as well as all derivative processing. So the creation of TIFFs, PDFs, JPEGs, TXT files, any derivatives, metadata as well.